The air was heavy, the sky bruised. On August 12th, 2025, Chengdu woke to a hush that felt wrong. Before dawn, the city exhaled in slow rhythms, scooters ticking at idle, a kettle hissing somewhere behind a window, the soft shuffle of a shopkeeper lifting a metal gate. Street vendors set out baskets and wiped the night's dust from glass. Students shouldered backpacks and traced familiar paths beneath a lid of low, gray cloud. It was ordinary, almost tender, and yet the light seemed dimmer than it should have been, as if the morning had swallowed a secret. A faint patter began, polite as a knock on a door. Just a sprinkle, the kind that glosses the pavement and perfumes the air. Umbrellas blossomed, shop awnings dripped. The city moved on, confident in its rituals. But the sky pressed lower, darker, heavier, as though a hand had settled on Chengdu's shoulder and would not lift. The first rumble came like a warning from another room. A second followed, closer, more impatient. The breeze thickened, trading the smell of breakfast for the metallic scent before a storm. Birds vanished from the wires. Dogs went quiet. Time itself felt wider, stretched thin by a tension no one could name. What followed was not a storm. It was an onslaught from the heavens. For 21 relentless hours, the capital of Sichuan was bombarded by ice. Not raindrops, not sleet, stones, chunks of frozen sky, small at first, then larger, then monstrous, hurled down with a fury that made steel flinch and stone ring like struck bells. In minutes, streets turned to fast rivers of white. Roofs bowed and split, their seams coughing water into rooms where families stood staring. Glass towers gave way in glittering avalanches that caught the gray light and broke it into a billion knife-edged shards. Sirens, alarms, the iron rattle of shutters dragged down too late, all folded into a single roar. Hail on everything, hail on everyone. This was more than weather. It was the city meeting a force that did not bargain. The day Chengdu learned how loud the sky could be, and how long a single hour can last when the world is falling. The day that would be remembered not for rain, but for stone. The day the heavens rained ice. It began just after sunrise. At first, nothing more than a drizzle, faint drops tapping against windows, a whisper of thunder rolling in the distance. Pedestrians carried umbrellas, expecting little more than a summer shower. Street vendors wiped their stalls, unconcerned. Children walked to school, laughing under the gray sky. But within the hour, everything changed. The clouds thickened and sank lower, their bellies swollen with menace. The air itself grew heavy, pressing down on the city like a weight. And then, with no warning, the sky broke open. What fell was not rain. It was ice. Sheets of hail tumbled from the clouds, pelting rooftops, shattering glass, and ricocheting off the pavement with a deafening roar. At first, stones no larger than pebbles. But as the minutes passed, they grew, golf ball-sized, then fist-sized, until entire blocks were under bombardment. In Tianfu Square, trams froze mid-route, their windows spiderwebbed by strikes. Passengers crouched inside as hailstones thundered against the metal hulls. The square, normally a place of movement and gathering, became a prison of glass and steel under siege from above. The great Sichuan TV tower, a beacon of modern Chengdu, suffered blow after blow. Its glass facade cracked, fractured, and finally gave way, raining glittering shards into the business district below. The tower that had stood as a symbol of the city's progress became a cascade of broken light. And in the historic lanes of Jinli, centuries-old wooden eaves crumbled. The delicate tiles that had withstood rain and sun for generations shattered under the weight of hail. The storm showed no mercy for old or new. Ancient tradition and modern ambition both bowed under its assault. Hour after hour, the hail fell. Streets filled with rivers of ice, gutters overflowed, and drainage systems clogged in minutes. Shopfronts burst open as glass windows imploded. Markets vanished beneath a blinding sheet of white. Entire neighborhoods transformed into frozen wastelands, unrecognizable to those who had lived there for decades. Life itself was paralyzed. Power grids faltered as transformers sparked and died. Streetlights flickered once, twice, then disappeared into darkness. The familiar sound of Chengdu, the buzz of scooters, the honking of cars, the chatter of markets, was silenced. In its place came a single sound, endless and merciless: the hammering of ice. By midday, the storm had already erased the city's rhythm. Time itself seemed to stretch, each hour an eternity measured in shattered glass and broken stone. For many, it was no longer a storm at all. It was a siege, an assault from the heavens. And with each new wave of ice, the question grew louder. How much more could the city endure? By the third hour, Chengdu's defenses began to collapse. The storm pressed its weight onto every corner of the city. At Shuangliu International Airport, chaos unfolded. 800 flights were canceled, schedules wiped from screens as quickly as they could appear. 150 planes were grounded, their fuselages cratered, wings scarred by blows too heavy for metal to ignore. Terminal roofs buckled and ruptured, releasing sheets of water onto passengers trapped inside. The cavernous halls, built for movement and control, echoed with panic and confusion. Across the city, the metro shuddered to a stop. 3 lines went dark as tunnels filled with icy floods. Escalators froze mid-motion, stairwells became rivers, and commuters clung to railings as water and ice surged around their feet. The hum of trains, so central to the rhythm of Chengdu, dissolved into silence. The Chengdu-Chongqing Expressway, lifeline of commerce and travel, disappeared beneath white drifts, a frozen scar cutting across the land. Bridges bent under weight they had never been asked to bear. Some held, trembling. Others surrendered, their spans sagging into the torrents below. In residential districts, glass shattered in storms of shards. Balconies collapsed outward, spilling furniture and lives into the streets. On Chuanxi Road, one of the busiest shopping avenues in western China, storefronts disintegrated one after another. Luxury shops, tea houses, street markets, all erased beneath sheets of hail. Alarm bells rang until their batteries failed. Power grids faltered. Transformers popped like fireworks, showering sparks into the darkness. Transmission towers toppled, their high-tension lines thrashing like whips across farmland and road. Nearly 2 million residents sank into blackness, their homes lit only by candles and the flicker of lightning. The familiar sounds of Chengdu, the chatter of markets, the whine of scooters, the rumble of traffic, were gone. In their place, a single sound, endless and merciless: the hammering of ice. Entire neighborhoods transformed into frozen prisons. Cars vanished beneath mounds of hail, alarms muffled under feet of ice. Apartments bowed beneath the weight pressing down from above. Families huddled inside, listening to the groans of concrete and steel, wondering if their walls would hold. And still, the hail fell. No pause, no merci. Just the relentless violence of a sky turned hostile. Chengdu was no longer a city in motion. It was a city under siege, trapped in an assault without end. Every minute added another layer of destruction. Every hour brought the capital closer to paralysis. By nightfall, Chengdu stood at the edge of collapse, and the storm showed no sign of surrender. But even as the storm roared, Chengdu did not stand alone. Its people, and its protectors, rose to meet the crisis. The first to answer were the fire brigades. Engines crawled through frozen streets, tires sliding on a glassy surface, sirens wailing into the roar of hail. Firefighters smashed through blocked doorways, pulling families from apartments where roofs had collapsed. They carried children wrapped in blankets, elderly clinging to their arms, entire households fleeing into a night more dangerous than day. Ambulances followed, their red lights flashing weakly through the storm's haze. Roads that once carried traffic in minutes became hours-long journeys. Paramedics lifted stretchers by hand through alleyways knee-deep in slush, refusing to leave the fallen behind. Inside, patients lay with shattered bones, gashed faces, bodies marked by the blunt fury of ice. Hospitals filled within hours. Waiting rooms overflowed. Corridors doubled as wards. Electricity flickered and failed, forcing surgeries by lantern light and phone flash. Doctors stitched wounds while the ceiling above rattled under an endless hailstorm. Nurses ran from bed to bed, exhausted but unwilling to stop. Police spread across the city, sealing off streets where glass facades threatened to collapse. They directed survivors towards shelters, stadiums, schools, gymnasiums hastily converted into havens. Patrol cars became lifelines, their heaters running, protecting families from the cold while roofs fell elsewhere. By dusk, the People's Liberation Army entered the city. Armored vehicles rolled forward, plows mounted on their fronts, carving pathways through frozen avenues. Engineering brigades erected temporary shelters, carried food and blankets, restored order where panic threatened to spread. Soldiers formed human chains to ferry supplies, their boots sinking deep into the ice. What had begun as a storm response grew into a battle for the survival of a city. Power crews fought against impossible odds. Every line they repaired snapped again under fresh strikes of ice. Entire substations lay crushed, their control rooms flooded and useless. Yet workers returned again and again, with tools in frozen hands and resolve that would not bend. And amid this machinery of response, ordinary citizens joined the fight. Neighbors cleared alleys with shovels. Young volunteers ferried bottled water to shelters. Elderly women prepared food for fire brigades who had not slept in days. In the darkest hours, Chengdu lit itself not with electricity, but with solidarity. Still, the storm's weight grew heavier. By the second night, the scale of devastation eclipsed every effort. Rescue teams pressed on, but the city continued to drown in ice. The emergency response was heroic. It was relentless, but against the fury of nature, it could only blunt the edges of catastrophe. And even as exhausted responders dug, stitched, and carried, the greatest devastation remained unseen. The human toll had yet to be counted. The storm did not end at Chengdu's edge. Its fury radiated outward, spreading across the vast Sichuan plain. Villages scattered across the countryside awoke to the same bombardment, the same roar of the sky tearing itself apart. Hailstones punched through clay rooftops, crushing beams that had stood for decades. Courtyards filled with ice, barns collapsed under sudden weight, livestock lay silent in shattered pens. Generations of farmers watched their homes dissolve in a single morning. Fields that once shimmered with rice paddies and golden corn were erased. Citrus orchards stood stripped bare, their branches broken, fruit torn and scattered across the ground. 700,000 hectares of farmland, enough to feed millions, were destroyed in less than a day. Harvests worth billions were reduced to pale wreckage beneath the frozen sky. Farmers wandered their ruined plots in disbelief. Where rows of crops had stretched like green seas the day before, now lay wastelands of white. In their hands, they held seeds meant for planting. But the soil had vanished beneath layers of hail, unreachable and silent. The highways carrying life between cities froze into graveyards of steel. Trucks carrying grain and supplies were abandoned, their engines drowned in ice. Goods spoiled where they stood, unreachable by any road. Bridges sagged under the weight of frozen debris, their joints groaning like wounded giants. Some collapsed outright, plunging concrete into rushing floods below. Industrial parks met the same fate. Warehouses collapsed, roofs torn open like paper. Machines drowned in frigid water. Entire production lines were reduced to rusting carcasses. Solar farms shattered, their panels cracked and scattered into fields. Wind turbines bent, their great towers folding into the storm. The losses multiplied. 12,000 vehicles lay abandoned. Buses, cars, delivery trucks, each reduced to twisted wreckage. Mobility itself vanished. Communities became islands, cut off by seas of ice. The devastation rippled outward. Markets across the province felt the shock. No crops to trade, no trucks to deliver them, no power to keep goods cold. What was lost in a single day would echo for months, even years. Chengdu had been the heart of the disaster. But the Sichuan plain was its sacrifice, a frozen scar carved into the land, visible from the sky. When the skies weakened, the full measure of devastation came into view. Numbers began to emerge, cold and sharp, marking the scale of loss. 427 lives were gone. More than 4,500 lay injured, carried to hospitals and makeshift shelters. 103 remained missing, swept into floods, crushed beneath rubble, lost in the chaos. For each figure, there was a face. A father shielding his family as a roof gave way. A grandmother caught in a market when the hail came down. A worker in a factory that collapsed before his shift had ended. Numbers could not capture their voices, their absence, the holes torn in families and communities. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded. Doctors stitched by flashlight when power failed, moving from patient to patient without pause. Children lay with bandaged heads, their eyes wide with shock. Parents held them close, whispering words of comfort, even as their own voices broke. Shelters filled with the displaced. Gymnasiums echoed with cries. Stadiums transformed into sleeping halls where strangers lay shoulder to shoulder. Families huddled in corners, their possessions reduced to what they could carry. The sense of home had been stripped away, replaced by fluorescent lights and the constant shuffle of weary feet. The human cost was only the beginning. Economists counted the damage in billions, but their ledgers told only part of the story. Factories lay silent, their machines frozen. Crops were gone, their fields stripped bare. Vehicles lay crumpled and useless, mountains of twisted steel. The total climbed past $16 billion, the costliest hailstorm in China's history. But money could not measure despair. It could not measure the nights spent waiting for news that never came, or the silence of streets that once sang with life. Behind every figure was a story. A teacher who would not return to her classroom. A farmer whose fields would never recover. A shopkeeper whose storefront was now nothing but rubble and ice. The storm had tested Chengdu's walls, its bridges, its towers. But above all, it had tested its people. And in that test, the greatest toll was not measured in dollars or stone. It was measured in lives forever changed. When the skies finally cleared on August 14th, silence fell over Chengdu. The storm had passed, but its scars remained. For 2 days and nights, the heavens had hammered the city without pause. Now the weight of that fury lay exposed in the streets. Boulevards once alive with scooters and neon signs were buried under drifts of ice and debris. Bridges sagged, their supports cracked and weary. The Sichuan TV tower stood wounded, its proud glass crown reduced to a jagged silhouette against the sky. The ancient lanes of Jinli, once filled with lanterns and voices, were muted and broken, their eaves scattered into rubble. In that silence, the scale of loss became undeniable. But so too did another truth. Amid the ruins, resilience began to take shape. Neighbors dug side by side through mountains of hail, clearing alleys one stone at a time. Families shared food and water with strangers who had lost everything. Volunteers carried blankets into gymnasiums where the displaced lay huddled together. Children, frightened but curious, played with icicles as their parents worked to rebuild. In the countryside, farmers returned to their fields. They did not come to mourn, but to plant. Seeds pressed into soil still scarred by ice became symbols of defiance, small, fragile, yet unshaken by despair. They bent their backs in silence, vowing that the storm would not claim their future harvests. Across the city, art began to reappear. Murals were painted on walls still cracked from a storm. Lanterns were rehung in alleys, red against the pale wreckage. Symbols of memory, symbols of persistence. Chengdu was wounded, but it was not broken. Because even when the heavens rain ice, even when towers shatter and fields lie bare, even when streets fall silent under the weight of disaster, the human spirit endures. The storm of August 12th will be remembered as the day a city was brought to its knees, but it will also be remembered as the day that same city stood again, scarred, shaken, but standing. And in that balance, between destruction and defiance, lies the story of Chengdu. A story not of collapse, but of survival.